Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's masterclass. Now, I'm the director of the Sustainability Program at University of Sydney, and as you know, we offer 3 degrees, which is the Master, the Graduate Diploma, and the Graduate Certificate. And in this degree, really, it's a very broad degree, and it offers perspectives on sustainability from many different angles, be it food and water, or law, or business, or energy and engineering, many different perspectives, and therefore we also have a very broad intake. So with this masterclass, I'd like to give you an impression of how and what you would be studying and learning in the sustainability program. And I have chosen a topic that is not specific to any one of the core units in the program, but that cuts across the various perspectives and the core units that are taught in this program. And so this is also to give you an impression of how the program hangs together and how these different core units were designed to really give a holistic picture of what is the sustainability challenge today. So in selecting a topic for this talk that cuts across, maybe not surprising to you, but I thought to choose climate change because, as you're well aware of, this truly cuts across energy and engineering, food and water, and social science dimensions, because climate change impacts on every aspect of our lifestyles. And so I hope you see this as the presentation unfolds. So look at this as an example of the challenges and also of the learnings that will await you in the sustainability program. So today will be about affluence and equity in the context of climate change. So Australia is a top emitter, and many of you know this. This is a global a world map in terms of emissions per capita, and you see Australia is red. Here it means a high emitter, as is the United States, Canada, and a lot of countries in the Middle East, oil producers. So this is known to you. But the reason why Australia is a top emitter is not necessarily because of its high energy intensity. Of course, you know, we have a lot of coal-fired power plants, and our electricity system is based on fossil fuels, but the same holds for many other countries. So you see this graph here. So Australia is really sort of in a little bit maybe above the world average in terms of its energy intensity. So this is not primarily the reason why we're a top emitter. The primary reason is, simply put, is because we are rich. As you see here, there's a beautiful correspondence between GDP per capita, which in the course of this presentation I will term affluence, and the emissions per capita. Basically, people who are rich emit a lot. And this is because of their lifestyle, because they spend a lot of money. So you see here already, affluence matters in the context of climate change. Many of you would have seen this report by the IPCC. It came out at the end of 2018. It's about 1.5 degrees, the necessity to stay below, and the requirements for staying below, which means that global emissions must halve by 2030, which is just 10 years away. I will use the findings from this report to put affluence in context. This diagram here synthesizes what's in the 1.5 degree report. Let's go from the top band, the orange band. This is basically the trajectory that would unfold if we had no climate policies in place, would see us at about 4.5 degrees or thereabouts. And then the green band below is current policies would see us at 3.7 degrees. And what many people don't know, that even if every country, through advanced policies, made true on their pledges to the Paris Agreement, and that's a big if, then we'd still be up for about 2.8 to 3 degrees Celsius of warming, which is absolutely unacceptable because of what's in the 1.5 degree report. And the next thing you can see if you go further down here is the vast difference in trajectories from even the Paris Agreement to the 2 degree and the 1.5 degree pathway. I'd like to highlight one feature of these pathways. Big systems like the world economy, what they usually do when they change is they flatten out slowly, gradually, to a peak, and then they decline. That's what the yellow, green, and purple curves do. The 2 degrees and 1.5 degree pathways don't do this. They have a kink at around when they were drawn at about 2015. That's where and it's no different now if we start in 2020. If at all, the kink would be more prominent. And this is not usually what big systems do. They don't stop suddenly, well, unless they find themselves in a situation of a disaster or a catastrophe. But normally they don't do this, only temporarily. That already will tell you that to get to 2 or even 1.5 degrees is associated with significant challenges. So here you see that, and also you've read this, affluent economies, for example, as the UK here, they seem to be decarbonizing. You've heard success stories from Europe, for example, or from other countries. However, there's a big difference between emissions per capita in a territorial sense and the carbon footprint. The territorial emissions may have decreased, but not so the carbon footprint, because carbon footprints include emissions from imports and they include those emissions from exports, so that countries that actually import a lot of energy intensive or emissions intensive goods, their carbon footprint will be higher than the territorial emissions. And this is exactly what's happening. For example, here, Germany, an example for Germany, a lot of emissions in Germany's carbon footprint come from overseas, and they are basically due to Germany outsourcing a lot of carbon intensive production, for example, to China or to other countries around the world. And then the emissions from these producing countries, they are said to be embodied in German imports. And of course, they're counted towards German carbon footprints. Now, carbon footprints have not reduced that much as territorial emissions. They've actually stayed constant or even increased. So, so we need to look at these issues holistically. Of course, in a global scope, there is no difference between the carbon footprint and the global territorial emissions, because obviously there's nowhere outside the Earth that we can outsource dirty production to, at least not yet. So we're asking now globally, what drives carbon emissions? Some people are under the impression that population growth is a large driver, or that technology is a large decelerator. So let's look at these factors one by one. So it is true that technology, and that's what you see in this graph, is responsible for reducing emissions. And for the past 20 years or so, this has happened at a rate of about 2% per year. And yeah, it's very stable over time. That's what our technological improvements have resulted in. But affluence is growing at 3% per year. So this is important to understand for what comes next over the next few slides. You have these factors that are, if everything held constant, and if you only let technology do its work, we would see emissions decrease at 2% per year. If everything were held constant and we would just grow more affluent, emissions would increase 3% per year. Combine these two processes and you see a net increase of about 1% per year. That is because affluence outstrips technological improvements. So now, population is only growing at about 0.5% to 1% per year. So, and that's of course drives emissions up, but not by that much. So affluence growth is a much, much stronger driver of carbon emissions than population growth. So now let's put these three factors together. And you have two different representations. At the top, there's a graph from the OECD, and at the bottom, these three world maps. They're based on work in School of Physics. So the top graph and bottom graph basically tell the same story. There are three factors at work. Two of those factors drive the emissions up, and that's population, less so, but affluence in a very, very strong and intensive way. And there's one factor that drives emissions down, and that's carbon efficiency or better technology. And the story from all three factors is that affluence and population combined outstrip technology. So basically, all these technological advances we've made, technological advances have worked hard and hard and hard, only to be completely cancelled out by the trend of us getting just richer and richer and richer, every one of us. This is important to know because it tells us something about the future. As people say, well, the technological advancement, surely we will get on top of this climate change conundrum. So let's see how we can do this. But at the very least, and this is sort of a halfway point in this presentation, this role of affluence shows you that we need to look at lifestyles. We need to address lifestyles. Banking on technology alone, or also curbing population growth, is not going to get us anywhere near the 1.5 degree target. So we need to look at lifestyle. So what exactly do we have to do about lifestyle to get us somewhere near 1.5 degrees? That is the topic of the next part of this presentation. So let's go back to this diagram and focus on the 1.5 degree pathway. In essence, the area underneath this pathway is a representation of how, what amount of emissions we still have left in the bank, so to say. And this is 550 gigatons from between now and about 2050, because by 2050 we need to be net carbon neutral. So, these 550 gigatons we have left to emit to have a 2 in 3 chance to stay below 1.5 degree. And this is only 2 in 3 chance. So even if we don't emit more than that, still a 1 in 3 chance that we exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius. And let's go with the 550 gigatons. Now, so this is an excursion. This basically says to you, well, we're now at this point where we have only 550 gigatons left, and that imposes on us a certain speed of reduction, right? Some people say, well, you go back, rewind the time and go back into the past and say, what if we hadn't waited for so long? You know? Okay, let's go back to 2000 and let's focus on what it would take to go to to halving emissions by 2030, but you know, starting much earlier with the abatement. If we had started in 2000, basically halving emissions by 2030 would have required a rate of about 2.5% decrease. This is exactly, or just 0.5% more of what technology has been doing anyway. So if we had started in 2000, the only thing that we would have had to do then is to freeze affluence and lifestyles at that stage, yeah, on average, maybe let poor people get a bit richer, and the rich people just forgo a little bit of their luxury consumption. But in essence, we could have stayed there and we would have reached a 1.5 degree target. Wait till 2008, that's the next curve, and the rate increases to 3%. Yeah, wait with doing something to 2014, the rate increases to 4% per year. Wait till 2019, that was last year, it's -6%, and now the rate of decrease that we have to implement is about -7% per year. You know that historically, that's from 2 slides ago or 3 slides ago, we've done 2% per year. So 7% per year is something that we have never, ever done before. You know? So this is a little footnote, little excursion. This is the effect of waiting. Anyway, let's go back in 2020. So this 1.5 trajectory basically means we need to have from about today's emissions about 55 gigatons per year. We need to go back by 2030. We need to have this to about 27.5 gigatons per year. Now, if you divide this by about 8 or 7.6 or 8 billion people, you get to about 3.6 tons per capita. I calculate this level because I want to say something about lifestyles. Okay, so keep this figure in mind for the rest of the talk. 3.6 tons per capita emissions is what we should aim for in 10 years' time from now on, to be on this blue trajectory. Okay, let's see. Well, today's situation, it's not surprising. Here you have a breakdown of the world's emissions. On the x-axis you have population, and the y-axis you have emissions per capita, and you see that rich people, Australia, United States, Canada, but also Europe, you know, way above 3.6 tons, way above. So we're at about 25 in Australia, yeah, and even in Europe, they're anywhere between 9 and 15. You know, Middle East, also even the more wealthy African nations are about 10. The wealthier Asian nations hover between 7 and 15. So, and only once we go to China, China's right on par right at the moment. Chinese people are actually emitting on average 3.6, and the people in Indonesia, Pakistan, and India, they're emitting less than 3.6 tons per capita. So they could even increase. This is very important to consider because we're going to move to equity very, very soon. So that's Australia. So if you wanted to get to 3.6 tons per capita in 10 years, we'd have to reduce by 80%, yeah? from about 25 now down to 80%. How could we do this? Could we reduce our emissions by that much? Well, half the world already lives at 3.6 tons per capita. It's mostly the less affluent part of the world. And so surely, I mean, well, we should be able to get there. We should at least see how we could get there. So in some places, well, technology. Let's throw technology at it. You know, energy intensity has been, emissions have been decreasing just because of technology by about 2% per year, right? So let's say we can ramp this up. Let's say we do something about energy intensity, that is just the intensity of fuels and how we use them. Do something with efficiency of appliances, and we do about something about carbon intensity, which means it's the fuel mix. We use less coal, more gas, or less coal and more hydro, and so on and so on. And let's assume we get to about 4% per year, which is about almost doubling the rate, the historical rate. This would get us about 30% emissions drop by about 2030, and that is actually also I think it's in the next slide. That's also what the International Energy Agency predicts in their World Energy Outlook. It's about under new policy scenario, about a 30% drop if we increase our efforts on getting more technology. You see, I'd like to highlight one of these bands in this graph, and it's CCS. CCS is carbon capture and storage, and there's a variant of this which is BECCS, which is bioenergy and carbon capture and storage. Bioenergy and carbon capture and storage is essentially growing trees in plantations and then using them to produce electricity, and the emissions from the electricity to store them underground or in reservoirs. So that's what's meant with CCS. So let's look at this now. Technology, so 30%. Some people say, well, let's plant trees. Let's plant trees at a massive scale. This could achieve another 5 to 10%. And the reasons for this relatively low percentage is that planting trees conflicts with biodiversity objectives and with food security objectives. So there's not an infinite amount of land that is actually available for this. So implementing those two, in our case, would leave still 40% of reduction to be done. So we wouldn't get there with these two measures. And then all the time, whilst we're reducing this, we have to keep in mind that other economies are increasing their emissions. So with our technological and measures, we run against, we're trying to outrun all this affluence increase that's happening elsewhere in the world and also in our own country. So you see, based on these prospects, it looks pretty hopeless that technology alone will save the day. And just as a background, the reason for the increases elsewhere in the world in carbon emissions is simply development needs. Yeah? It's electrification of villages and generally a more materially intense lifestyle, a higher degree of mobility, especially in India and South Asia and China. And these people have real development needs. It'd be untenable to ask them to not develop, because we have gone down that path. So we're not in a position to impose on them not to go down that path. So of course, we can assist them to do it in a different way than we have. But I'm just highlighting here these developments, and the impact on carbon emissions are quite enormous. And just with technological improvements, it's unlikely that we can counteract this. Now, an aside also to BECCS. BECCS, you see it sometimes presented as the silver bullet to reducing emissions. Yeah? Now, first of all, this graph comes from a status report from the CCS association. There are a few challenges with implementing BECCS. First of all, the top right, as of now, we have 5 facilities operating, and currently we capture about 1.5 megatons per capita. So this is minute. So our experience with this is very limited. Then to scale this up, look at the top left, the 3.3 gigatons is a factor of about 2,000, yeah, over the next 50 years until we could use this technology to become carbon neutral. This is a big ask. This is especially a big ask because basically bioenergy, you'd have to situate the plant somewhere where there's biomass resources, because you cannot transport the biomass for long distances because it's economically infeasible. And this location also has to be somewhere close to a suitable reservoir that has no leakage, that can, underground or offshore, that can accept a large amount of carbon dioxide, because you cannot transport huge amounts of carbon dioxide over long distances either. Finally, for this scale, top left, the amount of land that you need to plant enough trees to sort of create enough bioenergy to sequester these amounts of carbon, you need 300 to 700 million hectares. And this comes from the CCS association's report. That's about, I think it's about the size of India, right? So big doubts with BECCS and CCS. I would not bank on it as the silver bullet. It'd be good if advances were made, but it's nowhere near a certain or a guarantee. Here's some extracts from this BECCS report. Anyway, they just underline what I've just described. Okay. So now we've looked at the technologies in great detail. And again, from the second part of the presentation, we conclude we need lifestyle changes. So what about them? Can we complement these technological improvements with lifestyle changes? What would be involved? What's a further 40% reduction like? What would it look like for our lives? Just as an introduction to this last part of the presentation, there are people in the global south, in the less affluent nations, scholars, academic scholars amongst them, who say exactly this. You in the north, you've been enjoying this affluent lifestyle for many, many decades. It's time that you looked at this. because this is actually driving emissions up, and you're avoiding this topic in IPCC negotiations. You'd like to preserve your affluence here, but it's not working, and we ask that you take responsibility. There's one scholar, it's a Norwegian, a woman from Norway. She's a social scientist. She really puts the finger on Western society's reluctance to address the affluence factor in climate change. So this is an article that I recommend you read. It's very interesting. You don't really want to know. The title says it all. She says people confronted with the fact that their lifestyles are actually responsible for us not meeting 1.5 degrees, they engage in denial. And they do this in a way that is socially organized. And that is the fascinating aspect of this story. Social denial, as opposed to individual denial, means that it's happening on a grand scale. And it's even not explicitly mentioned. So she works in Northern Norway in communities where people can see with their own eyes buildings sinking into the permafrost. Climate change and temperature increase happens at a much, much higher pace in polar regions. And so people are acutely confronted with this. And they see flowers springing up 2 months before they would normally spring. They see ships sailing along coastlines where there's been no ship in winter for 1,000 years. But yet, she describes how people turn a blind eye, and how they engage in denial, because the consequences for their lifestyle would be too enormous to face up to this. So, and you can understand this. Let's look at the past. What do such large reductions, what do they spell out? For example, look at this curve here, and let's go from the right to the left. Let's go look at 2009. That was the global financial crisis. In GDP per capita terms, and translate this into energy and emissions, this is maybe just a small dent, 5% or so. You can see the US, Australia, Japan, small dent. Now let's go back to 1930, the Great Depression. Look at Japan and the US and the UK. This has led to about a 30% decrease in emissions and also in energy. That was the Great Depression, 30%. Finally, look at the end of Second World War. Let's look at Japan and Germany. Just imagine, Japan and Germany at the end of the Second World War, they experienced a decrease of 50% of GDP and energy, and presumably also emissions. I don't have figures about emissions, but you can assume that's roughly the case. That's 50%. That's not 80%. So, so that puts in perspective the amount of, in comparison, the amount of decreases that we're up for, and the role that technology may have, hopefully have, and what's left to do, the scale of this, and what this may mean for our lifestyle. So, confronted with this, of course, you can understand what Norgard reports. She said, people don't want to know about this. We really don't want to know, because the consequences for our lives would be just too severe. And so we'd rather go shopping because it's cheaper than psychiatrists. We retreat into our private lives. We succumb to affluence because it's comfortable. And we partake in social dining. That's the book. That's her book. And basically the article that I showed before in the slide is a summary of the book. If you don't have the time for reading the whole book, the book is great. There's also some articles that show exactly what's happening. Knowledge about climate change is widespread. Lots of people know about it. Lots of people are concerned about it. There's a very good correlation, but there's no connection whatsoever about action. And this is simply because what's written in Norgard's book. There's no action because it's too confronting. Advertising and online messaging does their part. Easy ways to save the climate and simple ways to reduce your carbon footprint. Based on what you've heard over the last 25 slides, there is no easy or simple way or comfortable way to do this if these figures are correct. So, are we stuck between a rock and a hard place? What options do we have? Do we face the whole challenge and get paralyzed by guilt, anger, and depression, or what's happening today. Do we make the transition palatable with easy measures and we all do our little bit and we fall woefully short of even the 2-degree target, as we are on course to fall short? Are we stuck between these two options? Well, here's some thoughts that I have. I can't answer this question ultimately, but here's some thoughts, and they come partly from Leslie Head's book about hope and grief. We have to accept the things that we can do easily, that they have little or negligible impact on emissions. So there is no easy way to address this. And also we have to accept that our own reluctance to embark on those radical changes that are needed to make a difference, and that at the moment are at the cost of the present poor and the future generations. We have to accept that these changes are radical and that we don't want to do them. And if it stays like that, we need to get prepared for grief. And that's the more important for Anthropocenians, meaning for those people who are young today, and a lot of our student cohorts who are studying this. Right? So this is basically a situation. This is the challenge, and this underlines the need to study sustainability. Thank you.